The rain fell in sheets against the stained glass windows of St. Patrick's Cathedral as I stood alone in the third row, watching them lower my father's casket into the marble crypt. Victor Vance, titan of industry, beloved philanthropist, devoted family man. The eulogies had painted him as a saint, but standing there in my black Chanel dress that suddenly felt too tight, too suffocating, I wondered if anyone truly knew him at all. I certainly hadn't. Around me, the cream of New York society dabbed at their eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs, their grief as carefully curated as their designer mourning attire. My stepmother Serafina stood front and center, draped in widow's black, her perfectly manicured hand clutching my stepbrother Damien's arm. They made quite the picture of devastation. But I had caught the look that passed between them when the priest mentioned my father's estate, a flash of something sharp and hungry that disappeared as quickly as it came. I had always been the outsider in my own family. Emily Aurora Vance, named after a mother I never knew, raised by a father who seemed to look through me rather than at me. When he married Serafina 12 years ago, I was 16 and desperately hoping for a real family at last. Instead, I got a stepmother who smiled with her mouth but never her eyes, and a stepbrother who treated me like an unfortunate piece of furniture that came with the penthouse. After the service, we gathered at the Fifth Avenue mansion for the reading of the will. The house felt different now, heavier somehow, as if my father's death had stripped away whatever warmth had once existed within these walls. Lucius Thorne, my father's attorney for over 30 years, sat at the head of the mahogany table in the library, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he arranged the documents before him. Serafina and Damien sat across from me, their faces carefully arranged into expressions of somber anticipation. The attorney cleared his throat and began to read. The words washed over me at first, legal jargon about trusts and holdings and assets. Then the specifics came. The Manhattan penthouse, valued at $45 million, to Serafina. The summer estate in the Hamptons, to Damien. The villa in Tuscany, also to Damien. Vance Holdings, the multinational corporation my father had built from nothing, majority shares to Serafina with Damien as chief operating officer. My chest tightened with each bequest. I had never expected to inherit everything, had never even wanted the money particularly, but this complete and utter exclusion felt like a slap across the face from beyond the grave. What had I done to deserve this? I had spent my entire life trying to be worthy of my father's love, trying to make him proud, trying to matter. Then Lucius reached into his leather satchel and withdrew a white envelope with my name written across it in my father's distinctive script. He slid it across the polished wood toward me. My hands shook as I picked it up, feeling the weight of it, so light and yet somehow crushing. Inside was a single airplane ticket, one way, JFK to London Heathrow. Departure date, 3 days from now. That was it. That was my inheritance. A plane ticket. The silence in the room was deafening. Then Serafina laughed, a bright tinkling sound that felt like glass shards against my skin. She leaned forward, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light from the Tiffany lamp. Oh, a plane ticket? How thoughtful. I suppose Victor wanted to make sure you got out of here as quickly as possible, though I can't say I blame him. You never really belonged here anyway, did you, Emily? She always called me Emily, never Aurora, as if refusing to acknowledge the name that connected me to my father. Damien snorted, slouching back in his chair with the kind of careless arrogance that came from never having to earn anything in his life. Ha! The spare should know when she's not needed. Tell you what, Emily, I'll even call you an Uber to the airport. Hell, make it a limo. Consider it my going-away present. Something hot and sharp rose in my throat. I stood so abruptly my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. My hand slammed down on the table, and I watched Lucius flinch. You think this is funny? You think my father spent 32 years raising me just to toss me out like trash? My voice came out stronger than I felt, shaking with fury and something deeper, something that felt like grief mixed with rage. You'll regret this, both of you. I promise you that. Serafina's laugh grew louder, and Damien joined in, their mockery echoing off the book-lined walls. They thought I was making empty threats. They thought I was still the quiet, compliant girl who had always stepped aside, always made myself smaller, always tried not to be too much trouble. I turned and walked out, my heels clicking against the marble floor of the foyer. Behind me, I could still hear them laughing. The sound followed me up the grand staircase to my bedroom, the room I had occupied since I was 8 years old. It had never really felt like mine. None of this house had. I was pulling my suitcase from the closet when I heard a soft knock. Benjamin, the butler who had been with my father since before I was born, slipped inside and closed the door quietly behind him. His kind, weathered face was creased with concern. Miss Aurora, he said, using the name he had always insisted on, please don't let them see you cry. They don't deserve your tears. I'm not crying, I said, though my vision was blurred and my throat ached. He moved closer, his movements careful, almost furtive. From his pocket, he withdrew a small USB drive and pressed it into my palm. His fingers were cold, and they trembled slightly. Your father gave this to me 3 weeks before he died. He made me swear to give it to you after the will was read. He said, "Don't trust what they say, Benjamin. Aurora needs to know the truth." He paused, his roomy eyes meeting mine with surprising intensity. "He never abandoned you, miss. I don't know what's on this drive, but he wanted you to have it when you were safe, away from them." Before I could ask what he meant, Benjamin was gone, slipping out as silently as he had entered. I stared at the small piece of plastic and metal in my hand, feeling its weight, wondering what secrets it held. I locked my door and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to insert the USB drive into the port. When the folder opened, there was a single video file. The timestamp showed it had been recorded 4 months ago, shortly after my father's cancer diagnosis. I clicked play. My father's face filled the screen, but he looked nothing like the robust, commanding man I had always known. He was gaunt, his skin papery and gray, his eyes sunken but burning with something intense, something that looked almost like fear. He was sitting in his study, the one room in the house that had always been his sanctuary, where even Serafina had not been permitted without invitation. "Aurora," he began, and his voice cracked on my name. He never called me Aurora. He always called me Emily, just like Serafina did. Hearing him say it now, that name my mother had chosen, made my chest constrict. My daughter, my Aurora. I have made so many mistakes, but the greatest was in how I treated you. I told myself I was protecting you, but I see now that I was only a coward. He paused, his hand trembling as he reached for a glass of water just off screen. When he continued, his words came faster, urgent. "This will, the one Lucius will read to you, it is not what it seems. The plane ticket is not a rejection, it is a path back to the truth I stole from you when you were just a baby. Your mother, Eleanor, she never died. I lied to you. I took you from her, and I lied for 32 years. The room spun. I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles white. This had to be some kind of sick joke, some hallucination brought on by grief and shock. But my father kept talking. Eleanor Harrington is one of the wealthiest women in England, old money, real aristocracy. When we met, I was nobody, just a young American with big dreams and no credentials to back them up. Her family despised me. They said I was after her money, that I would ruin her. We loved each other desperately, Aurora, desperately enough to be foolish." A tear rolled down his cheek. I had never seen my father cry. "When you were born, they tried to take you from us. They said I was unfit, that I would corrupt their bloodline. Eleanor fought them, but they had power, lawyers, influence. So I ran. I took you, and I ran back to America, and I told you your mother was dead because I thought it would be kinder than the truth, that she had let me take you, that she had chosen her family's approval over us." He covered his face with his hands, and I watched his shoulders shake. When he looked up again, his eyes were red. "But I was wrong. She never stopped looking for you. And now that I'm dying, I can't let this lie continue. Serafina knows. She found out about Eleanor 6 months ago, found the letters I had hidden, the investigators' reports tracking her life. She used it against me, Aurora. She threatened to tell you in the cruelest way possible unless I changed my will, unless I gave her everything. My blood ran cold. I couldn't let her have the satisfaction, so I changed the will, but not the way she wanted. The plane ticket, the address that came with it, it will take you to Eleanor. To your real mother, to your real inheritance. Serafina thinks she has won, but she has no idea what she has lost. You will have everything that should have been yours, everything I stole from you." He leaned closer to the camera, his expression fierce despite the illness ravaging his body. "They are dangerous, Aurora, Serafina and Damien. They orchestrated this, manipulated me when I was at my weakest. I don't have proof, but I believe they may have even hastened my death. The doctors say my decline was unusually rapid for my type of cancer. Be careful, but be brave. Eleanor will help you. She has been waiting for you for so long." The video ended. I sat in the darkness of my room, the only light coming from my laptop screen, and I felt as if the entire foundation of my reality had cracked open. Everything I thought I knew, every memory, every moment of loneliness and longing, all of it had been built on a lie. Rage bloomed in my chest, hot and fierce. Rage at my father for stealing my life. Rage at Serafina for her manipulation and cruelty. Rage at myself for being so blind, so passive, so desperate for scraps of affection from people who had never valued me at all. But beneath the rage was something else, something that felt almost like hope. I had a mother, a real mother who had been looking for me, a mother who might actually want me. I pulled out the plane ticket and examined it more carefully. Clipped to the back with a small paperclip was a business card. Eleanor Harrington, it read, with an address in Knightsbridge, London. On the back, in my father's handwriting, "Go to her. You belong there. I'm sorry I took you away. I'm sorry for everything." 3 days later, I boarded the plane at JFK. I had packed 2 suitcases, left most of my belongings behind in that mausoleum of a house. Serafina and Damien had not even bothered to say goodbye. I had heard them celebrating in the East Wing the night before, champagne bottles popping, their laughter carrying through the halls. Let them celebrate. Let them think they had won. As the plane lifted off and New York disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds and city lights, I felt the first stirrings of something I had not felt in years. Not quite confidence, not yet, but a determination. I was going to find my mother. I was going to learn the truth. And somehow, some way, I was going to make sure that Serafina and Damien understood exactly what they had done. I touched the USB drive in my pocket, my father's confession, and I wondered what other secrets I would uncover. The flight was long, and I did not sleep. I stared out the window at the darkness, at the vast expanse of the Atlantic stretching below, and I thought about the life I was leaving behind. It had not been much of a life, really. I had spent so many years trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given, trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I had none. No more. Whatever waited for me in London, it had to be better than what I was leaving behind. Heathrow Airport was a chaos of languages and hurrying travelers when I landed. I collected my luggage and made my way through customs, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Outside, the gray London morning wrapped around me, cool and damp, so different from the crisp autumn air of New York. I gave the taxi driver the address from the business card. He nodded and pulled into traffic, navigating the unfamiliar streets with practiced ease. We drove through the city, past red buses and black cabs, past centuries-old buildings standing alongside modern glass towers, until we entered a neighborhood of elegant townhouses and manicured squares. The taxi stopped in front of a Georgian townhouse that looked like something out of a period drama. 4 stories of honey-colored stone, with black iron railings and window boxes full of late-blooming flowers. It was beautiful in a way that spoke of old wealth, the kind that did not need to announce itself. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk, my luggage at my feet, staring up at the glossy black door with its brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. This was it. Behind that door was the woman who had given birth to me, the woman I had been told was dead for my entire life. I almost turned around, almost called the taxi back and told him to take me to the airport. But then I remembered Serafina's laugh, Damien's sneer, my father's words. You belong there. I climbed the steps and rang the bell. Footsteps approached from inside, measured and unhurried. The door opened to reveal an elderly man in a perfectly tailored suit, his white hair combed back, his expression professionally neutral. A butler, I realized. Of course she would have a butler. May I help you? He asked in a crisp British accent. I'm looking for Eleanor Harrington, I managed to say, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. My name is Aurora Vance. I believe she is expecting me. Or, well, my father may have contacted her. Something shifted in the man's expression. His eyes widened slightly, and he studied my face with sudden intensity. Miss Vance, he said slowly. Yes, please come in. Lady Harrington will want to see you immediately. He ushered me into a foyer that was all marble floors and soaring ceilings, with a crystal chandelier that must have been 6 feet across. Artwork that looked museum quality lined the walls. He guided me to a sitting room decorated in shades of cream and gold, gestured for me to sit on a velvet sofa, and disappeared through a doorway. I perched on the edge of the sofa, my hands clasped in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. What was I supposed to say? How did you greet a mother you had never known existed? Then, I heard it. The sharp, decisive click of heels on marble, growing closer. A woman appeared in the doorway, and I forgot how to breathe. She was perhaps 60, but she carried herself with the kind of timeless elegance that made age irrelevant. Her silver hair was swept back in a chignon, her navy dress was simple but clearly expensive, and her posture was that of someone accustomed to command. But it was her eyes that stopped me. They were my eyes. The same unusual gray-blue, the same shape, the same intensity. She stopped 3 feet into the room, one hand flying to her throat. Oh my God, she whispered. The cultured accent cracked. You have Victor's chin, but those eyes, those are my eyes. I stood, unsure of what to do with my hands. I'm sorry, I don't understand. My father said that you are Eleanor Harrington. That you are my mother. But my mother died when I was 2 years old. That's what I was always told. Eleanor's face crumbled. She crossed the room in 3 swift strides and stopped just in front of me, her hands hovering as if she wanted to touch me but did not dare. Your mother never died, darling. She has been looking for you for 30 years. I am Eleanor Harrington. I am your mother, and Victor took you from me when you were just 6 months old. The room tilted. I sat down hard on the sofa, my legs suddenly unable to support me. That's not possible. It's not. Eleanor sat beside me, and I saw that her hands were shaking. Did Victor tell you nothing? Did he never mention me? Never explain? He told me you died in a car accident, that's all. He never wanted to talk about you. Whenever I asked, he would get this look on his face, like it hurt too much, and I learned to stop asking. The words tumbled out. But 3 days ago, after his funeral, I received a video. He said he lied. He said he took me and ran because your family wanted to keep us apart. Eleanor made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. That bastard. That beautiful, foolish bastard. He wasn't entirely wrong. My family did try to separate us. They said terrible things about him. But I never wanted him to take you. I woke up one morning and you were both gone. He left a note saying he was protecting you from a life of judgment and disdain, that he couldn't bear to watch my family poison you against him. She was crying now, tears streaming down her elegant face, and I felt my own eyes burning. I hired investigators. I searched for years. But Victor was careful. He changed your surname at first, moved you around. By the time I tracked you to New York, you were 5 years old, and my lawyers told me that trying to take you back would result in a custody battle that would destroy you. Victor sent me one letter. He said that if I truly loved you, I would let you have a stable life, that he would make sure you wanted for nothing. He promised you were safe and loved. He lied about that too, I said bitterly. He remarried when I was 16. His new wife hates me. Her son treats me like I'm less than nothing. And when he died, he left them everything. The company, the houses, all of it. All he left me was a plane ticket to find you. Eleanor's eyes flashed with something fierce. Did he? Then perhaps he did one thing right at the end. She reached for my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I let her take it. Her fingers were cool and soft, and they gripped mine with surprising strength. Aurora. That's what I named you. Aurora Eleanor Harrington Vance. Victor sent me a letter when you were born. Just one, with a photo. You had the tiniest birthmark under your left eye, shaped like a teardrop. Without thinking, I touched the spot, the small brown mark I had always been self-conscious about, that Serafina had once suggested I have removed. It's still there. Eleanor's face softened. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a locket on a delicate gold chain. She opened it and showed me the contents. Inside was a photo of a much younger Eleanor holding a newborn baby. The baby had a small dark mark under its left eye. Opposite the photo was an inscription. Aurora, Eleanor, my heart, my hope. I have worn this every day for 30 years, Eleanor said quietly, waiting, hoping, believing that somehow, someday I would see you again. The tears came then, hot and fast and unstoppable. I had not cried at my father's funeral. I had not cried when Serafina and Damien laughed at me. But now, in this beautiful room in a foreign city, with this elegant stranger who was my mother, I broke down completely. Eleanor pulled me into her arms, and I let her. She smelled like jasmine and something else, something that felt inexplicably like home. She held me while I sobbed, her hands stroking my hair, murmuring words of comfort in a voice that cracked with her own emotion. When I finally pulled away, my face blotchy and my eyes swollen, I felt both wrung out and somehow lighter. Eleanor handed me a handkerchief, monogrammed with her initials, and I laughed wetly. I must look like a disaster. You look like my daughter, Eleanor said firmly, and you are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. We talked for hours. Eleanor ordered tea, proper English tea with sandwiches and scones, and we sat in that lovely room as the gray day outside turned to dusk. She told me about her life, about the empire she had built after I was taken, throwing herself into business and philanthropy as a way to cope with the loss. She told me about my grandparents, both now deceased, and how they had regretted their treatment of Victor in their final years, though by then it was too late. I told her about growing up in New York, about my lonely childhood, about Serafina and Damien and the cold, loveless house I had called home. I told her about the video Victor had left, about his warnings that they were dangerous. Eleanor's expression grew hard when I mentioned Serafina's name. Tell me everything about her. Everything. So I did. I described the Dishuk reading in detail, the way Serafina and Damien had laughed, the way they had been so certain they had won. I mentioned my father's suspicion that they had somehow hastened his death. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I think it's time we found out exactly what they did, and I think it's time we made sure they understand that stealing from my daughter has consequences. Something in her tone sent a shiver down my spine. This was not just a grieving mother. This was a woman with power, with resources, with the will to use them. What do you mean? She stood and walked to the fireplace, her movements controlled and purposeful. I am not without influence, Aurora. The Harrington name carries weight, in England and abroad. I have lawyers, investigators, connections in places that matter. If Victor was right, if Serafina and Damien manipulated him and potentially harmed him, then they need to face justice. And regardless of that, they need to understand that you are not alone anymore. You have a family. You have me. For the first time since my father's death, I felt something other than grief and confusion. I felt a spark of hope, and yes, a desire for justice. I want to know the truth about what happened to my father, and I want them to understand that they didn't win. That throwing me away was the worst mistake they ever made. Eleanor turned back to me, and her smile was sharp. Then we will show them exactly that. The next weeks passed in a blur. Eleanor moved me into the townhouse, giving me an entire floor for myself, decorated in soft blues and creams. She introduced me to her world, a London I had never known existed, full of art galleries and charity galas and boardrooms where decisions affecting millions were made. But she also got to work. She hired a team of investigators, the best in the business, and set them on Serafina and Damien. She had her lawyers pull every piece of documentation related to my father's estate and his final months. And she reached out to contacts in New York, people who had known Victor, people who might have information. What they found was damning. My father's cancer had been aggressive but treatable. He should have had at least 2 more years, possibly 5. But his medical records showed irregularities in his medications, dosages that did not match his prescriptions. His personal physician, when interviewed by Eleanor's investigators, admitted that Serafina had insisted on managing Victor's medication schedule in his final months, claiming she wanted to make sure he did not miss doses. There was no definitive proof of foul play, but the circumstantial evidence was troubling. And then there was the financial investigation. Serafina and Damien had been systematically draining my father's accounts for years, hiding it through a maze of shell companies and fraudulent invoices. They had stolen over $30 million. Eleanor showed me the reports in her study one evening, laying them out on her desk with a grim expression. They didn't just take his money, they likely took his life. And they tried to take your life too, by stealing your inheritance and your identity. I stared at the documents, my hands shaking. What do? We confront them, Eleanor said simply. We show them exactly what they've done, and we make sure they face the consequences. But first, I want to see how they're managing without your father's money. She made some calls. What she learned was satisfying in a dark way. The will had been clear. Serafina and Damien inherited everything. But what they had not realized was that everything came with massive debts. My father's businesses had been bleeding money, kept afloat only by emergency cash infusions that had now stopped with his death. The properties they inherited came with millions in mortgages and maintenance costs. Within 3 weeks of my father's death, the creditors had started circling. Vance Holdings filed for bankruptcy. The Manhattan penthouse went into foreclosure. The Hamptons estate was seized by the bank. Serafina and Damien, who had celebrated their great victory, found themselves drowning in debt and unable to afford the lifestyle they had grown accustomed to. When Eleanor told me, I felt a grim satisfaction. They must be desperate. They are, Eleanor confirmed, which is why now is the perfect time for us to pay them a visit. We flew to New York on a cold November morning, exactly 6 weeks after I had left. Eleanor's private jet made the journey smooth and quick. We were met at Teterboro by a car and driver and taken directly to the Fifth Avenue mansion. The house looked different. The windows were dark. The lawn, usually meticulously maintained, was overgrown. The gate hung slightly crooked on its hinges. It looked like what it was, a place that had been abandoned by fortune. Eleanor and I walked up to the front door. I rang the bell. For a long time, nothing happened. Then I heard shuffling from inside, and the door cracked open. Serafina stood there, and I barely recognized her. Her hair, always so perfectly styled, hung limp and greasy around her face. She wore stained sweatpants and an oversized sweater. Her face was gaunt, her eyes red-rimmed. When she saw me, those eyes widened in shock and something that looked like desperate hope. "Emily," she breathed. Then her gaze shifted to Eleanor, standing beside me in her tailored Burberry coat and Hermes scarf, and confusion crossed her face. "Who is this?" "This is Eleanor Harrington," I said, keeping my voice level. "My mother." Serafina went pale. "That's not possible. Your mother is dead." "No," Eleanor said, her crisp British accent cutting through the cold air. "I'm very much alive. And you, Mrs. Vance, have been living off wealth that should have belonged to my daughter." Serafina's face crumbled. She opened the door wider, and I could see into the house beyond. It was in chaos. Furniture covered in sheets, boxes stacked everywhere, the chandelier dark. "Please," Serafina said, and her voice broke. "Please come in. I need to talk to you. Both of you." We followed her into the library, the same room where the will had been read. She gestured for us to sit, but Eleanor and I remained standing. Serafina sank into a chair, looking 10 years older than she had just 6 weeks ago. "Everything is gone," she said, her voice hollow. "The company, the houses, all of it. The debts were crushing. I had no idea. Victor never told me how bad things were. And Damien, he has been drinking constantly. He is upstairs now, passed out. We can barely afford food." I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just a cold, calm clarity. "You laughed at me. You called me names. You and Damien treated me like garbage for years, and when my father died, you celebrated getting rid of me." Serafina looked up, tears streaming down her face. I know I was cruel. But Emily, you have to understand, I was trying to protect my son. Victor always favored you, always. Even when he barely spoke to you, I could see it. Damien felt it. I thought if Victor left everything to Damien, finally my boy would have his father's approval, even in death. Victor wasn't his father, I said coldly. And you didn't just hurt me. You hurt my father. You stole from him. You manipulated him when he was dying. The investigators found the financial fraud, Serafina, $30 million, hidden in shell companies, and they found the medical records. You were controlling his medications. She went even paler. I didn't kill him. I swear I didn't. I just wanted to make sure he was comfortable, that he didn't suffer. But you did steal from him, Eleanor said, her voice like ice. You committed fraud, and you tried to rob my daughter of her inheritance. Not just material, but her very identity. You kept her from knowing her mother. Serafina was sobbing now. Please, please, Lady Harrington, I've heard of you. Everyone has. You're one of the wealthiest women in the world. You could help us. Just a loan. Just enough to get back on our feet. Emily is your daughter. Damien and I were her family too. Please. I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy and uneven. Damien appeared in the doorway, his hair unwashed, his clothes rumpled, smelling of alcohol even from across the room. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. When he saw me, his face twisted with rage. What the hell is she doing here? He slurred. Come back to gloat, Emily? Come to watch us suffer? Watch your tone, Eleanor said sharply. You're speaking to my daughter. Damien laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Your daughter? That's Rich. She's nobody. Just the bastard child of a man who lied to everyone. Eleanor stepped forward, and despite being a full head shorter than Damien, she seemed to tower over him. That bastard child is the sole heir to the Harrington fortune. She is worth more than you will see in 10 lifetimes, and you, young man, are going to learn a very hard lesson about consequences. She pulled out her phone and made a call. Yes, this is Lady Harrington. We're ready. She hung up and looked at Serafina and Damien. I have investigators waiting outside. They have evidence of your financial crimes. The police have been notified. You will both be arrested for fraud and possibly for your role in hastening Victor's death. The evidence will be turned over to the district attorney. Serafina went to her knees. No, please, Lady Harrington, please, we'll do anything. We'll pay back the money, we'll leave the country, we'll never contact Emily again. Please don't do this. Eleanor looked down at her, and I saw not pity but cold judgment in her eyes. You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from a dying man and abuse his daughter. Actions have consequences, Mrs. Vance. There was a knock at the door. 2 police officers entered, followed by a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. Serafina Vance? Damien Vance? You're under arrest for fraud and suspicion of elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent. I watched as they handcuffed Serafina and Damien, watched as they were read their rights and led away. Serafina was still crying, still begging. Damien was cursing, struggling against the officers. Their voices faded as they were taken outside. The house was silent then, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I looked around the library, at the books my father had collected, at the furniture we had once shared meals around. I thought I would feel more, I said quietly. Satisfaction, or justice or something. But I just feel empty. Eleanor put her arm around my shoulders. That's because you're not a cruel person, darling. You don't take joy in others' suffering, even when they've hurt you. But that doesn't mean they didn't deserve to face consequences. What will happen to them? They'll go to trial. The evidence is substantial. They'll likely serve time, and they'll certainly be bankrupted by the legal fees and restitution. But that's not your concern anymore. Your concern is building the life you were always meant to have. We left the mansion together, walking out into the cool November afternoon. I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore. Just ghosts and grief and a past I was finally ready to leave behind. Before we flew back to London, Eleanor took me to one more place. We drove to the cemetery in Westchester, where my father was buried. It was a peaceful spot, with old oak trees and rolling hills. His grave was simple, despite all his wealth, just a marble headstone with his name and dates. I knelt in the grass and traced the letters of his name with my fingertips. Eleanor stood back, giving me space, her silhouette a quiet presence against the gray sky. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said to the cold stone. You lied to me my entire life. You kept me from knowing my mother. You let me believe I was alone in the world, but you also tried to make it right at the end. You gave me the truth, even if it came too late for us. I placed the bouquet of white lilies I had brought against the headstone. I hope you found peace, Dad. I hope you knew, somewhere, that I would be okay. Eleanor came to stand beside me. She didn't speak, just placed her hand on my shoulder. We stood there together in the fading light, 2 women connected by one complicated man, finally united after 30 years of separation. Are you ready to go home? Eleanor asked softly. I looked at her, at this elegant stranger who was my mother, who had fought for me in ways I was only beginning to understand. Yes, I said. I'm ready. The months that followed were a revelation. Living in London with Eleanor was like discovering a part of myself I hadn't known was missing. She enrolled me in business courses at the London School of Economics, determined that I should understand the empire I would one day inherit. She introduced me to her world of charity boards and corporate governance, teaching me not just about wealth but about responsibility. But more than that, she gave me something I had never had before: a family. A real one. We had dinner together every evening, sitting in the formal dining room or sometimes just in the cozy breakfast nook, talking about everything and nothing. She taught me about my heritage, about the Harrington family history that stretched back centuries. She showed me photos of my grandparents, told me stories about growing up in the English countryside, shared memories of her love affair with my father that helped me understand him in ways I never had. She also listened. She listened to my stories about growing up lonely and unwanted, about the small cruelties and large silences that had shaped my childhood. She didn't try to fix the past or minimize my pain. She just listened, and sometimes she cried with me, and somehow that made it better. "You're so strong," she told me one evening as we sat in her study, going over reports from the Harrington Foundation. "After everything you endured, you could have become bitter and hard. But you didn't. You remained kind." I thought about that. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm still figuring out who I am. "That's what strength is," Eleanor said, "not having all the answers, but being willing to keep searching for them." The news from New York came in pieces over the following months. Serafina and Damien both pleaded guilty to fraud charges in exchange for reduced sentences. Serafina received 5 years, Damien 7. The money they had stolen was ordered to be repaid, though with all their assets seized, that seemed unlikely. The Manhattan mansion was sold at auction. Everything Victor Vance had built was scattered to the winds. I felt a pang when I heard about the house being sold, but it was distant, muted. That life belonged to someone else now, someone I used to be. Emily Vance, the girl who tried so hard to be loved by people incapable of loving her. I was Aurora Harrington now, and I was learning what it meant to be valued for who I was, not what I could provide. Eleanor brought me into the Harrington Foundation as a junior board member. The foundation focused on education and opportunities for disadvantaged youth, and I found myself drawn to the work. There was something healing about helping others who felt lost and alone, about using the resources I now had access to make real change. I met people. Good people. Eleanor's circle was full of artists and entrepreneurs, activists and academics. I made friends for the first time in my life, real friends who liked me for myself. And yes, there were men who showed interest, though I wasn't ready for that yet. I was still learning how to trust, still building myself back up from the foundation. One crisp spring morning, nearly 8 months after I had first arrived in London, I was having breakfast in the conservatory when Eleanor came in holding an envelope. "This came for you," she said, her expression carefully neutral. "It's from New York." I took it, my heart skipping. The return address was a women's correctional facility. Inside was a letter, written in Serafina's careful cursive on plain prison stationery. "Dear Aurora," it began, and I noted that she had finally used my real name. "I don't expect you to read this, and I certainly don't expect forgiveness. I am writing because my therapist here suggested it might help me take accountability for my actions, and because I owe you at least an explanation, even if it changes nothing." The letter went on for 3 pages. Serafina wrote about her own childhood, about growing up poor and marrying Victor for security, about her desperation to give Damien everything she had never had. She wrote about her jealousy of me, of Victor's obvious love for me even when he couldn't express it, about how that jealousy had curdled into something toxic. "I convinced myself that you didn't deserve what you had, that you were taking from my son what should have been his. I made you into a villain in my own mind, so I could justify my cruelty. But you were just a child, and later a young woman, trying to find your place in a family that rejected you. I did that to you. I own that now." She described finding out about Eleanor, about how she had used that information to manipulate Victor. She admitted that she had been adjusting his medications, not to kill him but to keep him confused and compliant, to make sure he signed the documents she needed. She wrote that she hadn't meant for him to die so quickly, but that her actions had certainly contributed to his decline. "I don't ask for your forgiveness," the letter concluded. "I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that watching you walk out of that library with your head held high, watching you become the woman you were always meant to be, it made me see what I had become. Prison is hard, but it's what I deserve. I hope you are happy, Aurora. I hope you have everything you were denied. And I hope that someday you can let go of the anger I caused and live fully in the light. You always deserved that. With regret, Serafina." I set the letter down, my hands trembling slightly. Eleanor was watching me carefully. "Are you all right?" "I think so," I said slowly. "It's strange. I thought I would feel angrier reading that, but mostly I just feel sad for her, for all the years she spent being miserable because she couldn't see past her own fears." "Will you write back?" I considered. "Maybe. Not now. But someday, Maybe I'll tell her that I don't forgive her. Not yet. But that I don't hate her either. That I hope she finds some peace. I looked at Eleanor. Is that wrong? Should I be angrier? Eleanor came to sit beside me, taking my hand. There's no should in healing, darling. You feel what you feel. The fact that you can find compassion for someone who hurt you so badly, that speaks to your character, not your weakness. That afternoon, I went for a walk through Hyde Park, needing time to think. Spring had fully arrived, and the park was alive with cherry blossoms and daffodils. Families picnicked on the grass, children chased each other around trees, couples walked hand in hand. The world was full of life and possibility. I found myself on a bench overlooking the Serpentine, watching the sunlight dance on the water. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos. There was one I had taken just last week of Eleanor and me at a foundation gala. We were both in evening gowns, arms around each other, genuinely smiling. We looked alike. Anyone could see it. But more than that, we looked happy. I thought about the girl I had been a year ago, standing in that library in New York, clutching a plane ticket and feeling like her world had ended. I thought about how lost I had felt, how unwanted, how certain that I would never belong anywhere. That girl couldn't have imagined this. Couldn't have imagined having a mother who called her every morning just to check in, who remembered her favorite tea, who looked at her with such fierce pride and love. Couldn't have imagined having work that mattered, friends who cared, a future that stretched out full of possibility instead of dread. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Dinner at 7? I'm making your favorite, and I have news about the scholarship program you proposed. I smiled and texted back, I'll be there. Thank you, Mom. It had taken me 3 months to start calling her that. The first time, I had been terrified, worried it was too soon, too presumptuous. But Eleanor had burst into tears of joy and hugged me so tightly I couldn't breathe, and I knew it was right. I stayed on that bench for a while longer, watching the light change as afternoon moved toward evening. I thought about my father, about the complicated legacy he had left behind. He had stolen so much from me, but in the end, he had also given me everything. Without that plane ticket, I would still be in New York, still trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it, still believing I was fundamentally unworthy. The ticket had been a gift, even if it hadn't felt like one at the time. It had been my father's last act of love, flawed and imperfect like everything else about him, but love nonetheless. I pulled out my wallet and looked at the plane ticket I still carried, now faded and creased from being handled so often. One way, JFK to Heathrow. The ticket that had changed everything. Thank you, Dad. I whispered to the wind and the water and the memory of a man who had tried, in his broken way, to do right by me in the end. Thank you for setting me free. Thank you for setting me free. As I walked back through the park toward home, toward the townhouse in Knightsbridge where Eleanor would be waiting with dinner and stories, and the comfortable companionship we had built together, I felt something I hadn't felt in my entire life. I felt like I belonged. Not because I had earned it or proved myself worthy, but simply because I existed. Because I was Eleanor's daughter. Because I was Aurora Harrington. The girl who had been thrown away had found her way home. 6 months later, I stood in the Great Hall of the Harrington Foundation headquarters, addressing a room full of donors and scholarship recipients. Eleanor sat in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. I was announcing the Emily Aurora Scholarship Program, named for both parts of my identity, designed to help young people who felt lost and alone find their path forward. We all carry wounds, I told the room. We all have moments where we feel unwanted, unworthy, unseen. But those moments don't define us. What defines us is what we do next. How we choose to rebuild, how we choose to believe, despite everything, that we deserve love and respect and a place in this world. As I spoke, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain and the betrayal, yes, but also the unexpected gifts, the mother I had found, the strength I had discovered, the life I had built from the ashes of the old one. After the event, Eleanor and I walked home together through the London streets, now as familiar to me as New York had ever been. The evening was mild, and the city was alive with people heading to dinner, to theaters, to all the small joys that make up a life. You were magnificent tonight, Eleanor said, linking her arm through mine. I learned from the best, I replied. She squeezed my arm. I'm so proud of you, Aurora. Not because of what you've accomplished, though that's wonderful, but because of who you've become. You could have let bitterness consume you. Instead, you chose grace. I had help, I said. I had you. We walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Eleanor said, I was thinking, that old plane ticket you carry around, maybe it's time to frame it, put it somewhere special. A reminder of where you came from and how far you've traveled. I considered. Maybe I'll keep carrying it a while longer. A reminder that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing, even if you can't see it at the time. Very wise, Eleanor said with a smile. That night, I stood on the balcony of my room, looking out over the London skyline. The Thames glittered in the distance, the city lights spread out like a constellation of possibilities. Somewhere across the Atlantic, in a women's prison in New York, Serafina was serving her sentence. Somewhere else, Damien was doing the same. My father rested in his grave in Westchester. All of them were part of my story, but they were no longer the main characters. I was the main character of my own life now. I thought about the me of a year ago, heartbroken and lost, boarding that plane with no idea what awaited her. If I could send her a message, what would I say? "It's going to hurt," I would tell her. "You're going to discover that everything you believed was a lie. You're going to have to rebuild yourself from nothing. But you're going to make it. You're going to find your mother. You're going to find yourself. You're going to discover that you were never the problem. You were always enough. You just needed to find the people who could see that." The wind picked up, cool and fresh, carrying with it the scent of rain and possibility. I smiled and went back inside, back to the warmth and safety and love that I had finally found. The plane ticket had brought me home, but I had done the rest. I had chosen to be brave. I had chosen to hope. I had chosen to believe that I deserved better than what I had been given, and in choosing that, I had found everything I had ever needed. The story could have ended in bitterness and revenge. Instead, it ended in healing and hope, not because I was special or strong, but because I had been given a chance, and I had taken it. Because I had a mother who had never stopped looking for me, who had welcomed me with open arms, who had shown me what real love looked like. Years from now, when I had my own children, I would tell them about the plane ticket, about how sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as rejections, about how being thrown away can actually be the beginning of finding yourself, about how family isn't always blood, but it's always love. And I would make sure they knew, from their very first breath, that they were wanted, that they belonged, that they were home.